Yo, what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie comic interview. It's your host, and it's your host, Cody. I forgot my name, and we are keeping it geekly. We are here with our good friend, Kiomall-Evans of 12 Magic Muses, and we are going to be breaking down everything from the start of it to the end, and a little bit of everything in between. She was able to be active on 3 campaigns from Kickstarter to Indiegogo and Zoop. So we're going to be asking those questions as well. But Kay, thank you for starting. Thank you for, excuse me, I'm getting so tongue-tied right now. Thank you for hopping on and joining us today. How are you doing? And yeah, how did you start out creating indie comics?
Well, thank you for having me. Starting indie comics was kind of a compromise. I did animation for college and was hoping to become like a 2D animator. But I wanted to make my own series and like get that off the ground. But like once you actually go through the process of learning how animation works, you realize that you don't want to pull a hairy partridge and spend like several years doing 5 minutes of animation. Like, don't get me wrong, I love this work, but like I do not have that level of patience. So I had already done storyboarding and all this kind of stuff, and it was really nice to get into a different visual medium, and learning how to play with like the size of the page and the format and that kind of stuff. So I just kind of went ham and made a whole series.
This is your first entry into indie comics, and you're looking at over 1,000 pages. Like, that is just remarkable. Real quick, we have Oblivio over on Twitch saying hi. We have Ines and Shizuku. My apologies about the pronunciation of that. Yes, thank you. In chat over at YouTube. So how are you guys doing? Thank you for joining us. This is my 46th interview, and I'm just really excited because I had the opportunity to read a couple chapters before diving into it, and I loved it. I try not to judge a book by its cover. So when I was looking at it, I looked at the cover. I was like, okay, this seems interesting. I didn't know where we were going to go with it. And when we started with Willow attending school late, and we have her meet her friend Emma, and it's here we see this really like human emotional bonding happen, this friendship happening. And I think you had such a solid take with your writing and your art, like the way you were able to portray those emotions, because Emma's getting bullied, and you could really tell that's like affecting both of them like in a really bad way. And I just really loved how you were able to just get that right off the rip. Like, what was some of your inspiration for like kind of creating this like friendship between the two?
So actually I had originally started with everybody going to be happy dory friends, but then I realized like it was also going to be like a Monster of the Week kind of story, but then I realized that like a Monster of the Week kind of didn't really work with what I was doing, and I felt it was boring, and like I didn't know how to deal with these characters. So I decided that like conflict works better. And like, if I'm being honest with myself, like growing up in school, like nobody becomes that kind of close-knit friendship without a little bit of like, roughage that you have to get over. So I decided that like, what is like the most classic conflict in a school? It would be bullying. Oh yeah. And I decided that I was going to give the bully the second amulet, because if I gave Emma the amulet first, I figured she would probably use it to her advantage to get back. Not that I want the bully to have more power, but it was just better to have like this blackmail scenario with Willow. Yeah. And then she's just like, teach me how to have magic. And then Willow's just like, well, I don't want to teach you. And she's like, well, I'll stop beating up your friend, otherwise I'll beat up your friend again. So she's just kind of like, well, I don't even know what I'm doing. So
and that's really crazy too, because Emma like someone gets like transferred from the school, and they're wondering why it wasn't Georgia. Did I say her name right?
Yeah, Georgia.
Okay, I just want to make sure it was correct. And they were wondering why it wasn't her, because she's not really bringing anything to the school besides, punching people. So it's kind of crazy you decided to give her the ability. That makes it even more. I'm sure Emma is at that point just losing it.
Yeah, no. I mean, eventually, like, obviously, if you give the bully the amulet, the next step is to make sure that your best friend has one. So she does end up dragging her best friend into it and showing her magical powers. She thinks it's like a prank. But like, it builds like this weird tension between the three of them because like Willow wants to solve the problem of bullying, but she can't do it because like her friend doesn't want her to snitch, and she also like isn't strong enough obviously to fight Georgia. She's a little over her head.
So what's Georgia's problem though? Do we later find that out? I'm not trying to like spoil anything too soon, but
no. I mean, the webcomic is free to read at XIIcomic.com. So if you're worried about spoilers, go to XIIcomic.com and start reading because it has been out for like 6 years. So, but essentially, like Georgia and Emma have like this weird thing where Georgia is not very good in school and Emma is very good in school.
Okay.
So like Georgia hears the things that Emma says about her, which obviously doesn't justify the bullying, but she's not somebody that solves problems with words. So she just decides to bully her because she talks about her in a bad way, and that is shown later in the series, but it's it's very small and subtle, and then slowly over the course they begin to kind of like not necessarily like each other but tolerate each other, with Willow as like the balancing act between the two of them.
So this series you said was kind of centered around like the idea of like the 12 Chinese zodiac. So what kind of drove you to want to go that route and intertwine this within like this magical world that we're seeing like start to develop within Magic Muses?
It's really hard to explain it in detail because I have a second series coming out and like even the ending that's happening right now on the comic. So again, spoilers. So soul gems are actually kind of natural in this world, and nobody knows what, like right now in the comic, nobody knows what they're for except for the people that use them, and what typically happens is there's an animal association with a soul gem. So for instance, the headmistress has turned into a giant owl. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do the zodiac thing, just to like have that reflection. So they were all a special animal, and so Willow was the rat because the rat is the first member of the Chinese zodiac, and then it kind of like attaches around this shape of a mandala, so eventually all 12 of them come out. But yeah, so like I wanted the antagonists and the protagonists to both have this very similar but slightly different association with this magic. Okay. So, which will be explained later. I'm sorry, this is mostly the character development of these 12 characters. So you will find out more lore building in January, I promise.
So is like the second series kind of going to be like where everything starts hitting the fan then? Like kind of like where things like start to hit like more of a climatic like battle, I guess, because you're saying you're trying to have the antagonist have somewhat of a similar like balance with their powers. Are they going to follow like a zodiac theme as well?
No, not quite, and mostly just because it affects. They're not like one team versus the other. It's more like an illness that can affect you randomly. So some people, and it can affect you on different levels. So some people are able to still retain like their sentience, and other people are not.
Okay, I gotcha. So they don't realize what they're doing at that point.
Yeah, and because it was like so complicated, and I really didn't know what I was doing as a writer, I wanted to focus mostly on the girls and their relationships with each other, and build more of like a domino-esque kind of plot where everything happens because of what the girls do. Yeah. So it's mostly about like them trying to hide their powers away from the school, which is very restrictive. like borderline militaristic.
Yeah, Willow got sent to the office for just throwing a pencil.
Yeah. In the middle of class.
Yeah.
How you don't daydream. So yeah, and she got sent to the headmistress to have a talking to about throwing pencils in the middle of class, only to have Georgia show up and be like, "Hey, what's up?"
Yeah. So let me ask you this: that dream world, what is the connection between that? Because it was the way your coloring you went about. It seemed like a very special place. Is that kind of where the magic was developed, or is that just like your way of showing that she was dreaming?
So she is dreaming, but there's the way that I have worked this out is that this is how communication happens between their soul gems and themselves. So because they can't directly talk to each other, the best that they can do is enter a surreal dream space. And the same thing happens to Tilly later in the story when she's forced to wear this crown while under sleeping pills that forces her to talk to her zodiac animal. So I wanted very specific color associations, flower and tree associations, and then of course I just wanted to be very mysterious and have that kind of aura about it.
So I'm looking at the summary about Volume 2, and this is kind of what you were talking about earlier, how their magic powers have turned from intriguing to infectious. And things are starting to kind of take a darker turn. So what are we seeing happen within the series at that point? And then how does that lead into Volume 3? I'm really interested too. I noticed the names, Volume 1, Monsters, Volume 2, Mischief, and Volume 3, Malice. Was there any reasoning for going with M's or, any sort of special symbolism?
I really like alliteration, so the first series is Magic and Muses, so every title had to start with an M. And then the second series is going to be Rogues and Remnants, so that will have their books start with an R. But Monsters, I wanted that first because the main arc in the first volume is the main trio getting to know each other, and getting over this bullying, because it is something that happens, and I didn't want the bullying to instantly disappear. I wanted Georgia to stay being an asshole for the rest of the story. She's just less of one.
Well, you gotta flesh it out too. You can't just, if you just made her be your friend at that point at the headmistresses, it would have left a lot of questions, So I think kind of taking that and running with it was a good thing to do, a good route. We have Shadowhood 100 in the chat saying hi.
Hi, Shadow.
So sorry to interrupt. You can go on.
No, so yeah, once the first trilogy or the first series is done, or first book, we end on the inside of the walls, where we also get to see these markings, these strange markings on the side of the inner part of the walls, but we only see them for a glance. And then in the second series, this is when they start infecting girls in the middle of broad daylight in public. So while people can't see the familiars like they can, they end up fainting. So people start getting worried. And then because you have the student staff start to see this happen, Bebe, for instance, gets transferred to the local hospital. And then we see the doctor do some weird tests with a pendulum she has a weird conversation with the coach. So obviously there's something going on that they're aware of. And then at the same time, we run into our conspiracy theorist, Eve, and she shows them that the same markings that are on the inside of the walls are actually everywhere within the school. And they actually react when you're wearing a necklace.
Okay, so if you're wearing the necklace or having a soul gem, is that the only way to see the familiars? Because I noticed you said a lot of people couldn't see in them. So was it something if you're within the walls of the school you were able to, or what gave you that ability?
So as long as you have been affected by the I'll just call them parasites for now.
Mhm.
Once you've been affected by the parasites, you can see them clearly. Whether or not like you have a necklace or not, if you've been privily touched by them, you can see them. You don't lose that ability if you're not wearing a necklace. And mostly I did that for convenience. So I didn't. Most people just saw fainting instead of seeing a giant purple cow overtake your track star and knock her unconscious. And then, of course, the only thing that people can see is when the monster turns into an amulet. And so because things start unraveling very quickly, they also find out that the janitor knows that they've worn these necklaces, but hasn't brought it up to them, and like drops some hints about this batch. So it's like, oh, okay, so like this is a lot more normal than we've been told.
Yeah. So, I have to ask, as the creator, like the artist, the writer, the letterer, what did your average day look like creating these? Because it's such an expansive world. There's so much world building. There's so much, and outside of that, like there's just the interconnections between the characters. It's all like interlocking so perfectly. Like, what did your average workday look like? You made this weekly, right?
Yeah. So I'll be lucky and say that I did have some time of unemployment that definitely gave me some spare time. And because I was looking for work in the game-esque industry, I was just looking for something to help maybe brush up my drawing skills, because one of the things in animation is, unless you're specifically going into 2D cell, like hand-drawn animation, you're typically tweening, so you actually don't develop a lot of drawing skills in animation unless you specifically go for like that traditional Disney look. So because of that, I really wanted to get my drawing skills up to par. And the best way to do that is to draw a lot. And I find the best way to do that without getting bored is to have like an end goal and a story. Because I'm not really an illustrator. I need to have a story first and then a drawing, as opposed to the other way around. So I just decided that, I had been trying to write this story since I was in high school, and I was going to write it no matter how bad it was. That I just went from there.
Like character designs, you have so many different characters. How'd you come up with all the different models?
They're actually just like a mix and match based off of like 4 body types and 3 head shapes.
That's pretty smart though. That's pretty genius.
I mean, one of the big things in character design is to simplify your forms. And I'm not somebody who likes to draw in that traditional high detail comic book style, because I do animation. Sketchy is the way to go for us. So I also wanted to make my girls ugly. And I say ugly is a very broad term because I don't think they're ugly, but like I wanted to make sure that they had a lot of features that are very popular with male characters, that aren't typically seen with female characters. Like a large variety of them have big noses or big ears, buck teeth.
Yep.
Like freckles everywhere. Like they're very much not the traditional hyperfemme magical girl, which is what I wanted, because I am not hyperfemme and I have a big nose and like weird face. So I want to do it that way. And it just kind of worked.
I think it really makes the audience connect a lot more as well. They're able to identify with these characters a lot more, I feel, going that route as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it helps differentiate them too, because it's really easy to get stuck in same face syndrome. And I know that it's a very, like, same face isn't necessarily bad, because it can be a very quick way to get a lot of character designs out very fast when you only have to think about their clothes and their hair. But I don't particularly like drawing that way. I get bored, so I specifically wanted to get out there and be more playful with facial structure and like be more exaggerative on their body types.
We have a Shadowhood 100 saying, I remember an artist say they distinguish their own original characters with noses. It's cool to see more artists do it since they add more personality. I have to agree. I really think adding distinct features like that really set off and help like set apart different characters and personalities.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my teachers told me like the nose is the anchor of the face, and I think she used Ashley Simpson as an example, where like when celebrities get quite like rhinoplasty, it actually changes how your whole face looks.
Yeah.
So if you get an extreme rhinoplasty, like for instance, in Ashley Simpson's case, she immediately looked like her sister. She didn't look like who she was anymore. And all she did was change her nose. Nothing else changed. So for me, it was a very important feature to keep on, especially when a lot of female created artworks reduce the size of their nose and give them doll eyes. And so I wanted to kind of do the opposite because I don't get to see that very often.
You know, I've been told that I have like the profile of a Phineas and Ferb when I turn this to the side. I got a pretty big beak as well, so I gotta agree with everyone in chat. You know, the nose is a pretty big feature, and it really can. I can't even imagine what it would be like to have like a small one. You know, it helps keep my glasses up when I wear them, so I'm grateful for it.
You can breathe easier.
Yes. I'm able to breathe 50% more than the average person. So where are we looking at 12 Magic Muses going forward? You know, where you after the volume 3, and we have some bonus stories as well. Did you want to touch base on those before we dive into like what you're looking at for the future?
On volume 3?
Well, no, just it's right here. It says you have Awakenings and Shifting Sands.
Oh, okay. So those are 2 anthology projects that I did for the Spider Forest webcomic collective, of which I am a part of. So we've begun doing this yearly anthology project, and it kind of gave me a little wiggle room to play with like the history of 12.
That's awesome.
So yeah, but it's like so far back that it doesn't have anything to do with the actual story. So you're not missing anything if you read it. But it was a nice way to kind of like play with the lore and just kind of solidify it for myself, so I kind of knew how it worked a little better. And then, of course, as the story will go on, if I do any more anthologies, they'll probably have the same kind of revealing-esque story. I actually did a 3rd one, but I haven't put it up on my website because I'm very lazy. So,
where are we looking at for the future of 12 Magic Muses? You got the 3 volumes out. You have a couple anthologies. You know, where are you going forward? I know you said you had some big things happening in 2023.
Yeah, so I mean, Magic and Muses technically ended in 2019. It's publicly ending this year. It'll actually end the day before my birthday, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
My little birthday present to myself. I didn't know I was making.
You get to take a little break for the day.
Break, because I was already starting working on the 2nd series back in 2016 when the series had started to release for its 2nd year. So I've already been working on that for like 6 years now, and so the 2nd series is different than the 1st series, because the 1st series is all about the girls getting together, and the 2nd series is all about the world that they live in. So you'll get to see more about like how the world works, how the magic works, you know, even how the girls' magical powers work, and how they slowly get stronger as they go on, and just like how different it can be for different people depending on like, you know, what your status is. Like Vanessa has an appearance, which I think everyone will appreciate from the 1st series.
So who's Vanessa for the people listening and watching that don't know?
She's the girl that got transferred.
Okay, yeah, I totally slipped my mind. Totally slipped my mind.
So you don't see her for 1,000 pages, and then she comes back, which is super fun. But yeah, so like I've already got the entire series almost penciled. I'm hoping to have it penciled by the end of this year.
Wow,
a good chunk of it is already inked. Yeah, so like, and like the 3rd series is already being scripted out and thumbnailed right now. So like as I get out of the art part of series 2, I'm also starting to finish off the writing part of series 3, and that will be the definitive ending, because I want to do other things, and then I have like more projects that I also want to get my hands on that are
like,
nowhere
if I hear
near
another
as large.
Zodiac, I'm gonna lose it. So we got 3 series we're looking at. Wow, that is such a huge run for your first book. What else are you trying to dive in after this? You know, outside of 12 Magic Muses, where are you trying to go?
I just like, I guess my focus is more on like sapphic stories, which is women loving women. So and I like horror, and so
Those two could actually probably go hand in hand rather well.
yeah, I actually have a horror romance that I'm trying to write and get off the ground. That has already taken several intervals of figuring out how I want to approach it. And I think I have another one which has something like a demon and a wizard lady in the desert. So I'll figure out what I want to do with that one. But they're all very like amorphous right now because I'm a very sloppy writer. I constantly rewrite everything no matter what stage that I'm on. So
at least you're writing though, right? At least you keep going. A lot of people, they would probably get discouraged or something at one point. It seems like you, on the other hand, like you see it as a challenge to keep making better and better.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my headspace is that I'd rather have it done and be bad than just give up and not finish it. Like, obviously, if a story's not working, it has to be rewritten and recombobulated. But at the same time, like, people make bad work all the time. Like, massive studios spend billions of dollars on bad movies. So yep. I don't think it's a bad thing for me to write a bad book on the budget of my own dollar. So why not? Because then I can say that I have it. Like, that was my whole headspace with Magic and Muses, is that like I had this story forever and I wanted to finish it and I wanted something, and that was the only story in my head at the time. And
it took off. You grew, you developed a following. You are working on your second series. You have the third one like in progress as well. So you definitely, like, what you did worked. It goes to show you that a lot of recommendations, it just really falls on the person. We were talking about that earlier. A lot of people I talk to, they recommend doing like a short story or something, and you went just full send with it, and it panned out. It worked well for you. What was it hard not to get burned out? It just seems like you're doing a lot. Like, how hard is it to kind of like stay in that walk that line of not burning out but still churning out work?
So I take the comic process very slowly. Most of my peers will draw a complete page and then work on the next page, or work on a small batch of pages and then work on the next one. I work from the top down, so the comic, when I write, is always in a completed state of some form, even if it is completely unreadable. So for instance, Magic and Muses started with 22 bullet points of everything that I wanted, and then it slowly expanded into a draft, and then it slowly expanded into scripting, and then of course like thumbnails.
That's happening. A cool concept though.
So I didn't start the next process until I had a complete draft. And like, honestly, when I hit that, I was like, well, the story's done. The story is finished. And then I could just go back and be like, okay, now it's time to do it again.
It's time to start filling in the dots.
Yeah. And like, that's when I started to realize that like you can never work with your first draft because you're practicing at telling the same story. And we're always told that practice is important, but it's not just your drawing skills. It's your ability to piece the book together. So because I was working in chapter batches, it was much easier to figure out where I could shove like foreshortening or foreshadowing, where I could figure out what wasn't working because I hadn't posted anything yet. So if a page wasn't working, it wasn't even live, so I could just rip it out and then rewrite it. And so like it was just really easy to like just keep knocking out work.
Did you ever,
one stage at a time.
Did you ever struggle with like trying to make it like perfect before you moved on to the next page? I know a lot of like writer, creator, artists, they always, like, some of them like struggle with that, where they want to keep making it better and better, but then the comic never gets done. So I had a very firm stopping point because I had been stuck in the first chapter syndrome, where you always write that first chapter and then you maybe get to the second or the third chapter and then you go back and you rewrite the first chapter. And I realized that wasn't a process that worked for me. And later on, I learned that's not how writers even write. Like, writing is messy and not necessarily linear. So for me, it was just a matter of make garbage, and then just polish that turd until it shines in some format. But like,
I was always making the pages as if they were always correct. So like, even if I didn't like how I wrote the first chapter, I would change what I didn't like in the first chapter, but keep moving forward in the steps. So even if
Okay.
I was changing what was happening, I was still doing a sketch. I wasn't going back and rewriting it. I was doing the sketch page, and then once I hit inks, I did not change anything because I did not want to re-ink any page.
Oh yeah, that probably would have been a nightmare. Was inking like was that like the hardest part, you would say?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's digital, so like I don't have to worry about like dropping huge globs of ink on my pages, but at the same time, it's where the
Tedious,
most
probably,
detail, I wouldn't even say tedious. It's just where that's when you focus the most on like the shape of the line.
Okay.
And you're focusing less on like the actual storytelling of the page, because you want to get you want the line work to start to shine through.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course flatting and rendering were easier compared. So inking for me always takes the longest because that's when I take the sketches and start like actually shaping them into forms that we can recognize. And so I said, like, no matter how bad the page was, if it was inked, I wasn't changing it. Like, I might change the dialogue, and that was it. So it kept me trucking.
Yeah, and it kept you trucking for a very long time. I mean, there is an outstanding amount of chapters in this. You've really like created a whole world. I mean, at the end of the day, how do you feel about like taking that first step with the first chapter and then coming to the end of volume 3?
It was weirdly underwhelming. Because like obviously finishing that final page was just like, I did it. It's done. Like it's finished.
It's like, what do we do now?
Yeah, but I had already started working on series 2. And I realized that once it was finished that like I did have a story with series 2 because I wanted to make sure I had an ending. Because I wanted to have a stopping point where I just wasn't continuing the story. But I was kind of messing around with series 2 if I wanted to keep going because I didn't know how 12 was gonna feel by the end of it. So it worked out.
The way you describe series 2, like you said you played games. Well, you were interested in creating a form of games, but I take it you played games before too, right?
Oh yeah, like I have played a large number of games.
It reminds me of kind of like the Final Fantasy series. Like
really?
how you get introduced to the characters and to the party and the world building around those characters and parties, and then how the later parts of the game like takes you on like just a mass like adventure in that world.
Okay.
So the way
I actually played a PS2, so I think the only game that I played was 10-2.
Okay. Hey, a lot of people. So a lot of people like 10-2. For me though, if I was going to recommend you get into a Final Fantasy game, everyone says 7, but that's because of the 3D modeling. I would say do Final Fantasy 6, 9, Tactics. 10's good. 10 was good. 10-2 was a little bit different though. That was a whole different Final Fantasy game. I feel like I'm not trying to gatekeep here. I feel like I'm gatekeeping.
No.
I'm not.
It's fine. I can admit that I played it for girls in fancy outfits. Like that's why I played it.
No, dude. Oh man, Lulu. Oh please. But yeah, it kind of gave me that just the way like you're just introduced to everyone in the beginning, and you just see those friendships and everything just form, and then like later on they're like just traveling the world, and it just seems like the series 2 is going to be just like so insane. So what's series 3 going to be? Like that's just going to be like where things just start ending as a whole?
Yeah, so 3 is obviously going to be focused mainly as one large ending series. And it's mostly dealing with what happens at the end of series 2. And like obviously the girls have some problems to solve with themselves, and they like know this world, but surviving in it is very different. Especially now since they're adults, they're not children anymore.
Okay, so it's gonna grow with them too.
Yeah, so like there's actually a 3-year time jump between series 1 and series 2. So they are getting older, and they are kind of like learning how hard it is to be an adult and how little other adults know, and like they already weren't told enough in high school, and now they suddenly are expected to function in this society.
So I feel like a lot of that may have probably came like with learning experiences, like just in life in general, but like designing the characters and helping and fleshing out their personalities, was that difficult for you? Like that process? Because I mean, that just seems like making them grow with the series is such an awesome concept, but it just seems like it could be very difficult to like pull off.
It is very difficult, but I like the challenge. I mean, having obviously finished the first series helps a lot because I know who they are, and like even writing the first series, after making like the trifecta of the bully, the best friend, and the victim, it was like, how do I add to that isn't that, but isn't boring either? So like Tilly comes in as Emma's sister, and you know, she's very neurotic and does not know how to deal with this. Erin, on the other hand, is just as intelligent as Tilly, but she prefers to be very blasé and very like almost Vulcan logic about the whole situation. And then like Nana is just like this ray of sunshine to like an absurd degree. And then, you know, there's Eve, who is this little gremlin conspiracy theorist. And then we don't get to see much of Sarah because she doesn't come in until later, but you know, she's obviously just as responsible as Tilly. Tilly is the class president and she's vice president. So she's very concerned about like how like her friend's safety and that kind of stuff. Phoebe is a clown. Like, she is just an angry clown. She doesn't like, nobody respects her and everyone treats her like garbage. So she's just got a chip on her shoulder. You know, who else? We have, now I can't remember their names. We have Bebe, who is the track star. She's like straightforward leadership kind of person. We have Alice, who is like this goofy acrobatic type. You know, she's got a lot of energy and she can't sit still. And then we have the twins, Jody and Julie, and Jody and Julie are kind of like boss's right hand man, who is the janitor. They basically do whatever boss tells them, and so because of that they get like, you know, special stuff from the janitor. Like obviously cigarettes is probably the biggest thing because that's contraband. And so they all kind of have like these weird relationships with each other and outside of each other, so they don't necessarily Sorry?
I was gonna say, such a huge roster of characters too. Like, was it hard introducing all these characters within, you know, 1 volume, 2 volumes? It just seems like there's so much and so much backstory to create.
I mean, yeah, but like as I started writing it, like I slowly started to realize like where the most important should be, which is obviously on Willow, Georgia, and Emma. Okay. And you know, the characters that come in later, I wanted, again, that reflection with the rest of the cast that was already there and to add something that was different. So, like, obviously, going through the same story again and again, that practice thing, it was able to determine, like, more and more how to separate these characters from each other, at the same time having relationships with each other. But I didn't necessarily need them. Like, I need them to work together. I don't need them to like each other. And I think that's a very important part of when you're writing a large cast, is that trying to make everyone get along doesn't work in real life. So why would you make that happen in a book? Because it feels fake. And like, don't get me wrong, like you can have people that you work super well with that you will never be friends with. And you can have friends that you cannot work with. Ever. So like I wanted that kind of dichotomy, especially since like my husband is military, and like his whole discussion about how he has to like teach his troops and stuff like that was a very interesting dynamic. So if you're ever like trying to teach or organize people or manage people, you start to realize like, okay, I don't need them to like each other. How do I get them to work together? How do I get them to solve this problem? So it started to become like, if they're all looking at the same puzzle, how does each individual person solve that puzzle? Like, you know, Georgia would just
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
You know, whereas like Erin would pick up and like examine it and write down in detail like exactly how she's going to data this puzzle. You know, Eve would just think that there's like a bomb inside of it. I don't know.
No, it's really cool. That's why I asked, because like for me, I would feel like I would almost be stumbling on characters or stepping on feet here and there with writing. But then again, I'm not a writer. I'm just a guy that talks about it. So real quick, before we start wrapping things up, I do want to touch base on just the different campaigns you ran. You've done Kickstarter, you've done Indiegogo, you've done Zoop. As much as I love these being a spotlight for the creator and their comics, I also think it's kind of a good tool for other people to learn from. So I always like asking questions that could produce, I guess, like a learning tool for other people out there. So what's been like your experiences with all three, and which one do you ultimately prefer?
So each platform has its strengths and weaknesses. And I am going to say that Kickstarter is the best one out of all of them. And part of that is because Kickstarter has been around the longest and has spent the most time investing and discussing how to make things better with other creators. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of platforms in general take that information and actually utilize it. So Kickstarter has, and that's why it's the juggernaut of the platform that it is, because they have focused on discoverability. They have made sure that you essentially create your own mailing lists on their system. They're always adding new ways to distribute your rewards. They're very careful about how they add new features. They like to take their time with things. So from that stance, like Kickstarter has mostly focused on how to get you to other campaigns. And that's where its biggest strength is, because when I back a project on enamel pins, I'm going to get 3 or 4 other enamel pins that have the same vibe as the one that I just bought. Even though there might be 50 campaigns, it specifically targets the one that has a very similar aesthetic or similar like connected creators. So when I buy a comic, the same thing happens. I buy a lot of queer content. So when I start buying queer content, I want to see more queer content in my Discover list. And that's what happens. I don't buy a queer comic and then get a weird adult sex comic. Yeah. Is that with like giant titties on there? Like,
is that something you would get like on Indiegogo or something?
Yeah. So like, that's just because Indiegogo really hasn't focused a lot on their discoverability. And because of that, they've kind of leaned more on the Comicsgate side of things, which has caused them to have a bad reputation. Mm-hmm. However, from a technical side, they do have the best tools because they aren't afraid to implement new features very quickly. They aren't afraid to find new ways to organize like how your rewards are set up. Like they were the first group that had add-ons. So when you bought things, you could add more stuff after you bought it. So they were very, very product and sale focused as opposed to discoverability focused, which isn't a bad thing because like you want to upsell your own work. And Kickstarter didn't get add-ons until like last year or something. That's crazy.
Yeah. Did that cause like any turmoil? Like were people like, wow, you're copying them?
No, I don't think so. And I just think that's because Kickstarter already has a better reputation and has been talking about adding that feature for a long time.
Oh, so Indiegogo is pretty much like we're just gonna get there first.
Yeah. Yeah. So like they're trying to get people from a technological point of view. Mm-hmm. Kickstarter got big because they focused on discoverability and networking, which cannot be underestimated. And when it comes to Zoop, I have some qualms with Zoop. I will say that they are a great group of people and they are very, they are trying their hardest. And I can see that and I know that that's what they're doing because I am also an independent creator, and putting your heart and soul into a project that you know that should get off the ground is always a good thing. Yeah. But my biggest problem is that they have not reached the level of either of their competitors yet, and that's a drawback. And I do think that they have a decent system, but I am so used to running my own campaigns and building them and branding them, and like that's the way that I'm used to just running my entire project, that I could not do that, and that was very awkward for me.
So what, they run it for you?
Yeah, they basically run it for you, which is very good if you're new to the comic book industry. If you don't have any experience and you don't want to run a campaign, I would highly suggest that you go through Zoop, because, you know, they're not doing the blockchain thing. They don't have the bad reputation that Indiegogo does, but they are a new platform, and a part of their problem is that they are a new platform. So they are going to, you know, scrape their knees every once in a while trying to get going. And I very much respect that. But at the end of the day, I am trying to move books.
Yeah, you're trying to make money, you know?
Yeah. So for me, like, my patience has a limit. And I like having control, especially when I've had that control and now had it taken away from me.
Yeah.
So, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure other people can write emails all day, but when I'm so used to just being able to log in and edit something in 5 minutes and log out, it makes it so mentally frustrating to get the email of all the things that I had to remember that I wanted to change in the campaign and mail it off. And then, so that's just my main frustration with it. And then, of course, there's the fact that, like, they're not big enough, so they don't have enough people buying content that's similar to mine.
I gotcha. So, like, discoverability is a little on the rough side for them. Yeah.
So, like, you know, you'll go online and there's plenty of great comics there, but, like, the only other Magical Girl comic on there was The Good, the Bad, and the Magical Girl, and that was it. Whereas if you go on Kickstarter, there's quite a few, but it doesn't even have to be a Magical Girl. It just has to have a similar aesthetic as I do. It just has to be, like, queer. It has to be targeted at teens. And when most of the stuff that is there is targeted at adults, it's a little harder to get things going, because now I have to convince adults to buy things for their kids, and that's a little harder than when somebody who's 18 can just buy something for themselves. And so that's you know, that's the struggle that I found personally, and that's only because Zoop is new. And
big thing is you really can't put a price on convenience. I mean, it sounds like Zoop still has a little bit of learning to do, but like with Kickstarter and Indiegogo, if it makes your life simpler, you're doing so much as a creator already. Not only that, you're the creator, writer, and artist, so you're doing 3 times as much as everyone already. So taking that little convenience, that could make or break a lot. I would almost imagine.
Yeah, so the convenience is weird too, because if you're on the other side where you don't want to run a Kickstarter, because running a Kickstarter is also mentally draining. Like I can tell you right now, like, Kickstarter depression is real, whether or not you fail or succeed. And failing is a lot easier than succeeding.
Because you want your book to get a higher number than what it gets, right? But
here's the thing: if you fail a Kickstarter, you're not committed to anything. So you'll put in all this work, and that's what people get worried that they'll be upset over. But at the end of the day, sometimes it is just better to have nothing to do than to realize that you suddenly have to sell 500 books. You only budgeted for 200. Everybody who bought it was from Australia, so your shipping is through the roof. Like, those are the kind of things that can happen when you're, like, absolutely overly successful. Like, you suddenly have to find a way to move 2,000 books, and suddenly you're looking at, like, freight, and your shipping is phenomenal.
International is just ridiculous.
You know, or it's a 6-month wait because you didn't realize that China was going to take 6 months to send you your books. So don't get me wrong, there's, like, a lot of research you have to do, and it can be very exhausting to run a Kickstarter. So if you are a newbie, they will give you all the advice you need and the marketing advice you need to get going, which I think is very, very important and not to be underestimated. But if you've already been around the circle before, you already know what you're doing, you already know what your brand is, you want that discoverability because that is your main focus. And, like, my entire focus is not the books, it's the marketing. It's the move more, which makes it very hard to make Zoop work for me. So that's, like, the only thing that's the problem that I have with Zoop. And I don't feel that it is going to change anytime soon because it needs time to grow. But I do think that it's something worth investing in for creators who want another option.
No, I really appreciate. We had someone saying great insight, and I have to definitely second that. you had some really good feedback, and it wasn't like just like dogging it. It was constructive criticism. And that is what I think is the most important here. It seems like an awesome platform for someone new, wet behind the ears, but it sounds like if you're experienced, you definitely want to go with Kickstarter or Indiegogo, just depending on your preference on which platform. I heard Indiegogo takes a little bit less of a cut, but it almost seems like for that extra like percentage here and there, that discoverability is just far like outweighs anything else.
For me, honestly, between the two platforms, between Indiegogo and Kickstarter, it's discoverability. Although they did happen to make me upset, because for a while there, the only thing I was getting recommended was Brandon Sanderson's campaign. And I don't want to be recommended a campaign that's already funded, 100 times over.
Yeah.
I want a campaign that is struggling, because
God damn it, I get it.
I'm not gonna buy it. Like, shipping to Canada is insane. I'm not gonna buy this book. And there was no way for me to be like, don't ever recommend me this again. And it's nothing against the guy. So
is it hard shipping from Canada? Like, do you run into a lot of like international shipping that you have to account for?
Yeah, like for instance, we don't have media mail, which is probably your guys' best advantage in this whole comic book race. So everything is very expensive to ship out. Even me shipping within Ontario can be a minimum $20 just to get a book from one to another. It doesn't help that my books are fat.
Yeah,
my books are fat. They're heavy.
There's a lot of
I get why they're expensive. Yeah, so I get why that's the case. But at the same time, it is also very frustrating. This is also why I try to order things as locally as possible. Like, all the books are printed in Montreal, because the customs fees can get really crazy, even just coming from the United States. So, you really got to do your research and find out where your best financial options are. But my printer is fantastic, and while it sucks getting all those books out, it is pretty rad shoving 100 books in the back of your van and being like,
I made
these are
this.
all going out.
That is so awesome. Well, I think we've came to one of my favorite parts of the interview. We're getting ready to wrap it up, but I always love asking this one question, because I think it has the most potential to help. And that is for anyone that's out there that's watching, wanting to create their own, 12 magic muses, or their own webcomic, or their own indie comic, and they're just having trouble getting their idea going. As someone who's created 1,000+ epic tale, what would be your advice to them to just get started?
Find the fastest way to finish it. That's my recommendation. You don't have to know everything, but like knowing where you're starting, knowing what the climax of your story is. Those are two very important points. And then kind of knowing what the middle bit that you're most excited to share, whether it's like, a character falling in love or something like that. 4 points. That's all you need. 4 points. Beginning, rising action, climax, falling action. That's it. I also recommend Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which is hit or miss with people, but that was what gave me the 22 bullet list that got me to finish writing my book. It started with that 22 pages, and because I'm so used to animation, the screenplay made more sense to my brain. Always find different mediums to play in, and just find the fastest way to finish it. And then when you're finished, you're just expanding the same story. You're just practicing the same story. Your story is already finished in those 4 lines. It's not a good story, but it's finished, and you can say that you finished your story, even if it's just that small.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because it's a good brain booster to know that you finished it.
No, and doing those small acts of gratification helps keep you going, helps keep your eye on the prize. We have Shadowhound 100 asking, what about pitching a story where you know where it's going, but you haven't gotten to that point yet?
I would say jump to that point, because the middle connecting tissue are all details. Knowing and fleshing out your key points is what's going to give you the most satisfaction, because one of the problems with webcomics is everybody's like, it'll get good. Okay, but like, write the parts that are most interesting, because that will make you excited to get there. Like, even if you don't make those pages, get to those points first, because then you'll definitely know where it's going. And then you don't have this meandering plot that kind of doesn't know where it's going. Know where you're going. Build a scaffold. You know, that those points were what got me from point A to point B. And all the middle stuff, I realized most of it was bad and I didn't need it. So I just removed it. But the points stayed the same. There was always going to be Willow as the main character getting the necklace. There was always going to be, you know, the act of finding more weird things about the school. There was always going to be the giant fight at the end. And there was always going to be the weird, bittersweet ending that's going to come. So,
ooh, that sounds intriguing.
Well, for those who have Volume 3, they've already read it. So, for me, I already knew where I was going, and then all the stuff in the middle just grew out of that. So I think that's important. And you know, most people again write linearly, and that's not how the brain works. So you just kind of gotta agree to disagree with it.
Hey, well, I really appreciate it. You had such an awesome amount of information. I feel like this whole entire interview was just filled with such gold. I really appreciate your words, your advice, and your wisdom on everything, and coming on and helping us just flesh out this world of 12 Magic Muses. Guys, we are going to be wrapping it up. It is such a beautiful Thursday, and I need to spend some time outside. My allergies from my cats are acting up. I'm 32. I just discovered I was allergic to cats like 2 years ago. It's been a nightmare, but I love cats. So here we are. But we are going to be wrapping it up. With that being said, thank you so much for coming on, Kay. I really appreciate it. This was such an awesome experience.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Everyone in the chat, be sure to check out her website. Those links are in the description along with all of her social media platforms. Yeah, have an awesome Thursday, guys, but most importantly, keep it geekly.